What's up, you guys? Welcome to The Imagination. I'm your host, Emma, and today I'm absolutely honored to introduce you all to child sexual abuse survivor, overcomer, and whistleblower, former professional footballer for the English Football League, inspiration behind the film Floodlights, public speaker, writer and author, thought leader, founder of Inside the Boys Club, and professional hero, Andy Woodward. A little bit about Andy and what we will be discussing today. Born in 1973 in Stockport, England, Andy grew up in a protective working-class family scarred by tragedy even before his birth. His aunt Lynda, 9 months pregnant, was raped and murdered by Ronald Bennell in 1971. Football became Andy's escape and passion from a young age. Spotted as a gifted youngster playing for Stockport boys, he caught the eye of Barry Bennell, a charismatic scout linked to Manchester City and later Crewe Alexandra. Bennell, hailed as a young coaching genius, groomed Andy and his soft-natured parents with promises of stardom. What began as weekend stays at Bennell's home, lured by things like video games, pool tables, and football training, quickly turned into a real-life nightmare. From a tender age of just 10 years old, right before turning 11, Andy endured relentless sexual abuse, living in dual worlds, the bright promise of football by day and terror by night. Bennell's manipulation was masterful. He targeted vulnerable boys from humble backgrounds, wielding fear, threats, and control. The horror deepened when Bennell formed a relationship with Andy's older sister, also named Lynda after their murdered aunt, married her, and had children with her, all while continuing to prey on Andy. Andy carried the secret for decades, channeling suppressed rage into his game. He turned professional with Crewe in 1992, contributing to promotions and playing in nearly 200 league matches across clubs before retiring in 2003. Yet the trauma manifested in panic attacks, toxic relationship patterns, and struggles with mental health. In 1997, when Bennell was convicted in the U.S., Andy gave a police statement but stayed anonymous to protect his career. Joining the police force post-retirement, he sought to help others, only to face further institutional failures. The turning point came in November 2016. At 43, battling personal demons, Andy waived anonymity in a Guardian interview. He detailed the abuse, Bennell's grooming tactics, and systemic cover-ups. The response was seismic. Hundreds of victims emerged, leading to Bennell's multiple convictions, totaling over 50 years, and revelations of a pedophile ring across clubs like Chelsea, Manchester City, and Southampton. The statistics are staggering and sobering. Globally, recent studies reveal alarming prevalence. Up to 20% of child athletes experience contact sexual violence, with rates highest in elite levels where power imbalances are extreme. In the UK and Europe, surveys show 65% of former youth athletes endured psychological violence, 44% endured physical violence, and 35% endured non-contact sexual abuse. These figures highlight how sports' hierarchical structures, where adults control access to dreams, create fertile ground for exploitation. Predators like Barry Bennell exploit this, targeting vulnerable families with promises of stardom, while institutions prioritize reputation over protection. Today, Andy remains a powerful and unstoppable advocate. Despite the targeting and harassment he has received since going public with his testimony, he continues to relentlessly engage in public speaking, sharing his experiences on podcasts and platforms to inspire survivors and demand accountability and justice. Believing in spiritual synergy and universal purpose, he vows to continue revealing more truths about institutional betrayals, emphasizing that light will overcome darkness through collective courage. Andy is no ordinary survivor. He is a warrior whose voice dismantled a hidden empire of abuse, saving countless present and future generations. In a world that once silenced him, he now echoes eternally, quote, "Speak your truth, for it has the power to heal and transform," unquote. His legacy is not just survival, but the floodlights he shone on the shadows, illuminating paths to justice for all. So you guys, without further ado, please help me in welcoming today's guest of honor, overcomer and whistleblower, absolute warrior, advocate and activist for survivor and children's rights, humanitarian, passionate purveyor of truth, and a man who turned into the guardian he needed as a child, with courage that conquers the darkness and a voice that heals the wounded. The one, the only, Andy Woodward. Andy, it is an honor to have you on today. I'm so grateful for you to be here. Thank you for coming on.
Wow, what an intro that was. To me, I'm just Andy, and if I can help anyone, and that's just me, But that was powerful. I was like going, wow. So thank you for the kind words.
It's like, geez, I get all that. Yeah, it's pretty
Yeah.
incredible, and every survivor thinks that you're doing this not for yourself, but because others went through it and deserve justice, and that this is happening all over the world. And that's exactly what a hero is, somebody who's selfless, somebody who runs into a burning building to save victims while everybody's running out. And that's what you do. And that's why you're a hero, and you deserve those kind words. And I'm very sorry society hasn't treated you kinder and others who have come forward. But we're helping to pave a path for that to change through these testimonies and through corroboration and empowerment. And your story is such an incredible example with that, with all the lives that you've changed and helped bring justice to, and even just validation. So I thought we'd start. Your story is very interesting in the fact that you were preyed on a little bit later on in life than a lot of guests on my podcast. Personally, a lot of survivors, it starts very young where they're very vulnerable, and it starts in the family through the parents and parental figures, where your upbringing was a little bit different. However, before you were born, there were actually some very mysterious things that happened in your family that connected with your abuse later on. And I thought maybe we'd start with that history, and then we could get into your own childhood and upbringing and get into your testimony.
Yeah, that's great. I'm a big, now I'm 9 years on from what I first revealed. It's interesting on my journey to really understand how deep this goes in terms of, I talk about dark and light, but it's not. It's the sinister of generations, and how it's been hidden for so long that there's no coincidence what happened to my auntie, because I also believe there's a universe out there, and I'm not religious in any way, but there's something. And she went through the most horrific pain. She was 9 months pregnant, walking just down the road I'm like, what, 4 or 5 miles away now. And yeah, she was just walking alone and 9 months pregnant, and this Ronald Bennell was waiting for somebody to walk past, and he was a predator. And yeah, he did awful things to her in that back garden, and murdered her. And as a young boy myself, obviously my parents was, what is really important with this, Emma, as well, is so people understand that my parents were so protective of me as a young age. And I remember seeing my mum as a young child in pain, and she used to cry all the time. And I didn't know what it was, but obviously it was the trauma and the grief of losing her sister at such a young age. And they were so protective in the fact that I wasn't even allowed down the road. She'd watch me on my bike, on my little grifter, and they were the most loving parents. They didn't have much money, but I lived on a council estate, and they tried their best for us. They'd always put themselves in debt to get us Christmas presents, and they were really, really, really loving. But what comes with that also is a vulnerability as parents, because they were vulnerable, both of them. And although they were so hyper in terms of me going out anywhere, because the predator that murdered my mum's sister, they didn't realize that there was a predator waiting to come and get me, which is really shocking. And I didn't. I now know, obviously, the relationship and what they were, but they were related. and it's mind-blowing if you really think about that. It's absolutely mind-blowing. And he knew that as well, by the way. He knew who it was. And yeah, so my young childhood was one of love. It was one of protection. It was one that I remember primary school, and I was a kind-hearted boy. I was probably soft. I know that because I've always been like, I'm still soft now and I'm 52, but I can't change my heart. But yeah, I mean, just my childhood and what happened to my parents in my mum's sister, it was catastrophic. So that's a bit of a synopsis on before I was born to show that this has been going on generations. This evilness, this, hiding what actually was behind, and I also believe, in past generations, specifically, it was more generated towards men. But in our generation, there has been women that have done these awful acts and things, but because it was a very men power generations before, the vast majority of that were men taking advantage of boys, girls, wives, women, and it was all hidden. In fact, it probably wasn't hidden. It was probably plain in sight back then because they had the power over women. They had the power over boys. They had the power over men that were vulnerable. So, it's just a synopsis on the generations that this has been going on, because I believe it's been going on, gosh, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years.
And so for your parents, it seems that their vulnerability almost came from their trauma that was unhealed within themselves. And it made them vulnerable to not be able to prevent further trauma. Instead, they tried to control the environment as much as they could with the love that they had and the care, and not wanting that to happen in their environment, and ended up missing signs of perpetration and abuse happening in circles that because they were so loving and trusting, they gave that out willingly to people around you and to people that didn't deserve it.
Yeah, it's so true, Emma. And, the culture back then in the 80s, the culture was different. And if you think back, well, if you try and, or anyone that's listening to try and comprehend the cultures now compared to then, we only had, well, my mum and dad had a TV. We were blessed, but there wasn't much more out there. It was a free ride, and the car, you had a car, but it was pick up, come and stay at my house, and it was a different culture. So, and back then, to be a professional football like it is now, footballers these days, it's even less that as children, they end up being footballers. But back then, it was every boy's dream. And it was a perfect place to have that position of power and position of trust. It was phenomenal. And I don't know, I know of hundreds, but I don't know of any parent that I've spoke to that really, really could see what was going on. And I think that was the orchestra of these rings, knowing to go for the vulnerable, ones with trauma, one's parents that were, not so, didn't have wealth, or also that were so vulnerable and kind. And that was part of the tactic.
Absolutely. And that's really misunderstood by all of society, what a perpetrator looks like, because in the movies, in books, it's always very obvious who the scary guy is, who the bad guy is. They look a certain way, act a certain way. They have a darkness to them. They're outwardly evil and deceptive outwardly. where true evil lies behind smiles, behind kindness, behind even empathy. And what they do is they weaponize those things against their prey, you know, and the patience that a psychopath, that a perpetrator, that a pedophile has for their victims, you know, the lengths that they'll go to keep it secret, even if it takes years. That's really hard for people to believe that, you know. But to me, I compare it no different than anybody who's not a psychopath or a pedophile or perpetrator, who has a passion, somebody who might be interested to be a scientist one day or to go to school to be anything. You know, there's certain steps that you take to get there, and that drive propels you through, and you end up, you know, ultimately spending a lot of time and years and patience getting to your final goal. And that is the same way that pedophiles and perpetrators look at their prey. It's not about what position they're in necessarily. They don't care if they're in a classroom, if they're a gym teacher. They just want to be around children, and they'll do whatever they can to get there, including being as nice as possible and winning everybody over around them. And that's why it's so deceptive, because it is the soccer coach who smiles and is rooting on the kids and visiting the parents and there for really special events and who seems like they care. It's the teacher who's educating the child and sees them every day and gives them straight A's or helps coach them through hard times. You know, it's really heartbreaking and devastating to find out who these people actually are, that it's not the villains that you can point to. It's the people with the smiles that we're literally trusting every day with our children.
Totally true, Emma. And, you know, I think this is really important, that people that do that, you know, I was bringing all this up 9 years ago, and, you know, what I'd done a lot of research. You know, I was in the police for 13 years, and what happened there was catastrophic, which I will explain later on. But what is true to see is the lengths that they will go to. And then society says, and those in law turn around and say, or in prisons, that they are put in a place for protection. Now, anyone that's committed a number of burglaries or robberies, when they go in prison, they're with like-minded souls. Now, they educate themselves to, so then when they come out, they've got more ammunition, more weapons to come back out into society. I'm not saying all do this, but certainly the psychopaths and proper paedophiles, they get together when they're in these prisons, and they will speak to each other, and they will talk about their ways and how they have done these things and got away with it. And that builds up with them in communities and their collaborations in prison whilst they're serving. So, you know, it just weaponizes them even more. And they learn new tactics whilst they are in those places. And, you know, the odd ones are serving, well, like Bennell, 35, 40 years. But those ones that have just started on the ladder, for instance, you know, those ones that are looking at child porn on internet and all of that, you know, that where's the education and where's the understanding of where their mindset is? And it's getting into what their behaviors and why they've done this. Not to, you know, I'm going off piece here, but this is really important, that the lengths that he went to with me, because I was 10 years of age, but there was a ring there, Emma. They were all communicating together. And that is what's shocking, that it was right under the noses of all these clubs, but all they wanted was results and players coming through the systems. And the best ones would generate moves to different clubs and make money for the system. And that's where, and that goes in any sport. So gymnastics, you know, football, rugby, you name it. You are a commodity. You are just a number. You are a person. And whatever's happening to you, that doesn't matter. Because whatever's going on, as long as they are producing these professionals, then so be it. And later on I'll talk about how humanity is like that. It really is, Emma.
Absolutely. And what you're really illustrating is child and human trafficking, creating commodities out of humans and making money off of them while abusing them in the
Yes.
process. It's a form of human trafficking that definitely sort of flies under the radar. And I don't think people realize what they're seeing or hearing whenever these allegations come out and these convictions are made, these abusers. And so let's get into your story. When did you start becoming interested as a child in football? And what was your early childhood like?
Yeah, I mean, when I was only aged 5, and I was playing with a ball, and everywhere I went, I'd take my football with me. And my dad was quite good at football when he was younger, but he didn't really make it yet. He was a beautiful person in terms of he never pushed me. He wasn't one of these parents that said, "No, you have to go." He just wanted me just to explore and enjoy. I played cricket, which I was gifted at as well. My headmaster said that I was in primary school, said I was better at cricket than I was at football. And I spoke to him a couple of years back. He's very, very elderly now. And I said to him, "Do you know what? I wish I had taken cricket, because I wouldn't have ended up with this." you know. And I can smile about it because I've got to, what happened is catastrophic. But as a young child, I just lived and breathed football. I'd watch it with my dad, and then I started getting involved in a local team. Then I ended up playing for Stockport boys, and it was that happened. It was. And something else, that what others will appreciate with this is when you've had significant trauma, you can actually watch it back like a video, and significant moments of trauma, you can actually see that I can do it now. I can see him on the side. I know what he was wearing. I know his blue jacket. I can see him now, you know. But he came up to my parents and then said that he wanted me to. He was starting a new team, and it was still at Man City, and wanted me to go training there. And he was forming a new team. But little did my parents know that, and a lot of people, that he'd done that for years, and that was his MO. That was his method of creating a team, taking up till about 14, 15, and then hand them over, and then start again,
Oh,
because he'd done with them then, so he needed the 10-year-old again, and that cycle had been going on for years. So that was that, really. And you know, I was only 10, um, and the vulnerability of that is so. Yeah, I can see the image of me there. That my abuse started just after that, and when a lot of people in trauma, they find it really difficult to go back to that child, because there's a lot of blame and shame. Because what we do is we feel shameful that we allowed it to happen. But when you see that image of me there, it's like it's really powerful to show that I was a 10-year-old boy, and it wasn't my fault. And that's one of the hardest things when you're going through you're going through trauma and trying to put all the pieces together, is the emotional attachment to the blame. And that's something that I suffered with. But just a couple of weeks, maybe months, I was staying in his house, and he asked my parents to stay there, and that's where it all began, Emma. It didn't take long. It only took a few weeks, and I remember going to his house in middle of the country. If you can imagine a cottage where there's only a couple of houses there. It was remote. It was around winter time coming up, and they have a lot of snow there, and he got me, invited me into the house, and there was a pool table and a jukebox, and then he had an Alsatian dog, a Pyrenean dog. He had a monkey. He had fish tanks. He had all the best videos because he owned 4 video shops, of all things, and that was part of his MO. That was part of his method. And yeah, I started staying there, and within a couple of weeks, he got me in his bed, and his favorite chat line was "Follow me," and he started this "Follow me," and I was in fear, and I never forget it. My life changed on that moment, and I had to follow everything he did, and it was horrific. And I just remember the fear was phenomenal, and that fear didn't leave me until I still now get a little bit of support, but that didn't leave me, and it never left me. And that's why I always say that first time is the most damaging moment of your life, and you're left with a life sentence. Because I always say, I was raped hundreds of times by him. But I always say that it doesn't matter if it happens once, Emma, or it happens hundreds of times. That that trauma is a lifelong sentence, but we can come through parts of that. So it started at 10.
Absolutely horrific. And just to think, again, going back to the profile that we believe, society really thinks that pedophiles fit into, that they look a certain way. It's just the ultimate betrayal that somebody so sinister, vile, and evil could do all of the things that he did, with hiding behind his smile and getting into this position purposely to be around little boys and to groom them and their families. I mean, it's unbelievable that he would go to your home and talk to your parents and build a relationship with them. I mean, just the deliberation, and it's an operation. They are very careful and very intricate with how they infuse themselves into their victims' families, because if you were to go and tell on him, for example, which you didn't, and children don't, your parents they want the parents and the people around you to question you, not him, and be like, what do you mean this guy's so nice? He would never do something like that. It's the ultimate deception and betrayal.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm just thinking back, I'm having flashbacks now, they're coming. But it's like, so if you think of, this is the lengths that he went to, because to look at him, he was tanned, he had curly hair. He was, all the mums used to like him because he had all the gift of everything. He could do things with the football that people wouldn't understand. But more importantly, he was so methodical with the way he did it, because he had a girlfriend and she was in her 20s, late 20s, I would have thought. And I was 10. Yeah, 10. Well, this went on for about 2 years. And they took me away on holiday, and she knew what was happening. And I used to hear him, I don't want to be graphic, but he was having sex in the other bedroom. And I used to feel like I was safe, that he couldn't come and get me when she stayed. But after that, he used to come in the room and still do things to me. So I was never safe, even with a so-say girlfriend there. He was still relentless with me, that he'd still come in the room. And, that just continued. And there was another boy with me as well a lot of the time, but he stopped staying all of a sudden after about 18 months. And then I just felt alone, because it was just me. And I used to feel so much more fear because I was on my own. And my mum did ask me whether I still wanted to keep staying there, and I said yes, of course, with the fear. but he'd left me, and it wasn't his fault. It was just he stopped staying, and I was left in a very compromising, fearful situation. It was horrible.
Absolutely horrible. And so sad too, just to think, that little boy that you were, that we just saw, just
Yeah.
that somebody would prey on you. When I look at that picture of you and that boy smiling in that photo, and I know that smiles for you and who you are today and the man that you grew into, he's smiling at you. But your story,
Yeah.
I mean, it covers so much ground and just shows how this happens right under our noses. And one of the things I wanted to ask a little bit more in depth on are these grooming tactics. I think they really do go under parents' noses, and parents are so allured and enthralled by the smiles and the kindness and the help and the promises of achievement and fame. And, it just goes on and on and on, the deception. But what falls under the radar are the subtle grooming tactics and manipulation that's there all along that you only realize in hindsight. And I wanted to see if you could maybe illustrate from your own testimony some of the ways that you yourself were groomed, maybe some things that made you personally vulnerable, and even the different ways that, he groomed your family and they didn't even realize it.
Yeah, I mean, they're so tactical the way that they do things, and it's like, I know culture was different then, and nowadays they are so much more equipped, because you've got the dark web, you've got the internet, you've got all these different elements now that you didn't have back then. But one of the key things is, and it happens now, people from all parts of the world, the initial key to it is the fear that they put in the child. And he used to throw nunchucks at Chinese stars at me. He used to use the nunchucks, so he'd learn how to play them with the Bruce Lee type. And he used to get me holding a piece of paper, a newspaper, and he'd split it in half in front of me. And the fear in me, I thought he was going to obviously hit me with it. And it's those tactics to start with to put that fear. So whether it's a young girl or a boy, the initial bit is to show what they can do for the boy, which is all euphoric, and it's all, oh wow, you're amazing, you can help me, you can do this, you can do that. But then the next stage is to make sure that the individual is in fear, i.e., sex trafficking, you will do what I say, because the alternative is X, Y, and Z. And when they're young and naive and vulnerable, everything's out the window, because there's so much fear there. So that, even now, would be a tactic that they use to put the fear in the child. And then with a parent, in all industries, whether it's in media, film industry, music, sport, the church, boarding schools, all of them, they will make sure that a parent or a family member or whatever, or you name it, they will put an icing around it, as though they're doing such an amazing thing for the child, the woman, the boy, the man, that they are delivering something special for that individual or groups. But the underlying thing with the person is that they're in fear and they are frightened. And that's the key, because he put me in that much fear. I was frightened. So that's pretty much around the tactics of what they'll use. And then they're a bit like chameleons. They can change and shift, and they're so smart with the narratives and how they do it. It's, yeah, they're very educated people.
Very deliberate.
Well. Yeah.
There was a survivor, a Catholic school survivor from here in the United States that I interviewed, and he grew up in a household like yours where it wasn't abusive. It was just a normal loving household, and ended up going to a Catholic school like people like Raphael and others have, that Raphael Viola, who has been on my podcast and with you, you know, and just ended up like you being the predator, or excuse me, the prey of a predator, unbeknownst to him and his family. And one of the things that he said that the priest did that abused him was he'd go up to each kid and put a hand on their shoulders, like kind of rubbing their shoulders. And he'd choose to prey on the kids that froze. There were certain kids that would kind of like push him off and be like, what are you doing? You know, and he knew those kids had boundaries. Those were the ones that wouldn't freeze in that moment. And then the kids that did, those were the kids that he put into a separate category.
Absolutely. And that's another, and that's another tactic of theirs. And that's what he did in football and sport. And I know that other, you know, sports have been like that. And it's just to find out, just to check the individuals and work the boys or the girls out, work out the parents or whoever's bringing them to actually know. And the odd occasion I know of Bennell that he got it wrong a few times, and what he'd do to make sure, if there was somebody that pushed him away and said, no, go away, leave me alone, that player would no longer play for the team. He'd be out of the team, gone. So he would literally say, no, he's wrong. Or there was one occasion that, you know, I remember and about stealing in the changing room. You know, he's a thief. He's not playing for us anymore. But what had happened is he pushed him away. So I have to get rid of this one, destroy him. So the tactics, you know, it's like Jimmy Savile and all of these clever paedophiles, psychopaths. They knew how to play it off, and they still do now. You know, I believe there's groups out there that are doing horrific things in different countries that, you know, when it breaks my heart, like third world countries and stuff like that. It's just horrific, the tactics and the things that they do. It's heartbreaking. And, you know, the other thing as well is there's a saying that a percentage of people can then turn into a learnt behavior, turn into, you know, a paedophile. But the one thing I get is that there's some that might, you know, go off piste or off that branch, Emma, that can maybe touch and dabble in it. But I truly believe that there's certain humans on this planet that are literally designed or want to cause significant harm to others, whether it's children, boys, girls, humanity, murders, the serial murders. There's something that is in them, or they've learned to be that way, because it's a serial killer and also a serial paedophile. You know, paedophilia at the highest level. There is something, I can't put my finger on exactly what it is with them because I'm not trained with the brain, but I know that their brains are not like a majority of humanity.
I'm really happy you brought that up because that's a really great point. There's a very fine line between psychopathy and pedophilia in a lot of ways. If you compare the ritualistic aspect of what they do, like a serial killer who obviously is, you know, going after many people, and then a pedophile who does the same thing but with children, there's a lot of patterns that align there, and then that lack of empathy or ability to discern that this is wrong, you know, and that they keep repeating the pattern. And the thing to me that I have really honed in on learning through hearing so many testimonies is that pedophiles, you know, we use that word, but really the essence of these people is they don't necessarily just get off on the fact that they're preying on a child, even though that's an element to it in a lot of cases. It's not just the sexual attraction that is completely, you know, unabridged, that they can't control. It's their, they get off on harming something that they perceive as being weaker than them. And statistics show that a lot of child
Yes.
abusers are also the same people that abuse animals. They go hand in hand. And it's not necessarily just an attraction like what we're told a pedophile is. It's this hunger and this urgency to harm something that they perceive as being weaker than them, that can't stand up for themselves, that can't fight against them. Like they can't pick on somebody their own size and go perpetrate because they know that person will fight. But a child and an animal won't. And to them, that's very exciting for them. It's like an adrenaline rush. It's this thing that they're like addicted to. They're addicted to that feeling of harming something that can't defend itself against them. And it's really sick.
That is, and there's so many layers to that as well. I mean, it's like, I refer to Bennell and the sick things that he did. He'd drive down the road with me in the car, and he used to have like pound coins, like metal coins that we have. And he'd open his sunroof, and he'd throw them out to hit the car behind and smash the window. And that was fun for him. Yeah. And he used to do that regularly. So, that there's something different about them, and that he had. So you said about harm to animals. He never looked after the animals he had. I used to have to feed them. He had a small little beautiful monkey. He never used to feed that. I used to feed it, and I was only 11, 12, and he used to sit on my shoulder and eat cucumbers, and that died because his heating went, and it broke my heart. And he didn't. He didn't care in the slightest. But he only got that for the front to entice kids in. And I don't know where he got it from, but he got a puma. A puma, the big cats. And it was a baby. And all of a sudden it started to grow, and it was growing big. And he did used to get like raw chicken for it and throw it. And he used to get off on that. Like, he used to put his paws up and his claws at me and like make the biggest growl. Like, it was awful. And I used to cry, and he used to laugh. For that was, and then it got so big, all of a sudden it disappeared. I don't know what he did with it, whether he killed it. He used to have an air rifle, whether he killed it, whether he dumped it. He said that he'd given it to a zoo, but no, he'll have just dumped it in a field somewhere and got away. And that's the levels that they'll go to just everything was just, it didn't mean anything. But all the time he used to tell me that he loved me. And I was 11 and 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. I went to see him in prison in 2003. And I'll never forget, I sat there and I was, I was trying to, claim against Crewe. And there's so much about I can tell you, Emma. But, I sat down and his words to me, "I still love you, Andy," and smiled. And I just went into shock and child mode. And I felt like that 10-year-old child again. And I remember, going out, and it was the solicitors got me to do that to help my claim. And looking back on that now, that's like catastrophic. It could have killed me, actually going into a prison and meeting the man that raped me all those years. And, but I've always been a yes man. I'll do what I'm told. I'll do this. But I remember sitting in the car and crying my eyes out. It was awful. But that's what it's like a Jimmy Savile, in your country. I know about the gymnast coach. They had no, there can't be that many of them as bad as certain ones that have been caught that are, that, like I said, they are evil. It's evil. There's nothing more to it. It's evil. They're the darkest form of humanity, and they need taking out, and it goes even higher. And those ones that are You know, what else they also do, you'll know also that they're intelligent people with power. And, you know, even Bennell had 4 video shops, he had money, he had cash everywhere. You know, they are intelligent people as well. So those in power up there that have been doing this for years, one day they need outing for what they've done. But because of their power and because of their money and because of it's just a game, it's not a game. This is humanity. And that needs looking into, Emma. And I know my stuff. Don't want to go too much into it, but you know, as me in my teenage years, it was horrific. It just kept going. He never stopped. And then, you know, I think I was 13, and he'd split with this older lady, and my sister had started going cleaning the house, and then he got me down an alley in Butlins. It's like a holiday camp place, and he said to me, "Right, Andy, I need to tell you, I love you, but I'm in a relationship with your sister. We're more than friends." And he used to do a thing with his tongue, and he said, "If you say anything, I will kill you, and you know I can." And I was just frightened to death. And he'd got Lynda, and he'd got me, and he'd literally got us both. And that was just terrific, I remember. But I was still trying to play football. Uh, you know, one Christmas Eve, I think I was 13, and I actually turned him away because I was sick of being raped on Christmas Eve because it had happened the 2 years previous. I might have been 14 actually. And I said no, and he wouldn't speak to me, and then he dropped me from the team, and he pulled me and he said, "That never happens again." And that was his power, you see. He had the power over me in the football team, he had the power over me with my sister, he had the power over me with everything. Um, and I didn't do it again. I didn't say no again after that. And he just carried on raping me until I was 16, nearly 17. And he got caught because my sister had come downstairs and she was still in a relationship with him, and he was doing an act with me in the lounge, and she saw it. And I think that spooked him, albeit to this day, Lynda, my sister, she says she can't remember it, but she's full of trauma. But I do, I remember it like it was yesterday. And I think that was my get out, because I think he would have carried on. So yeah, there was so much in those 6 years of hell, proper hell.
How did you cope in your front life? You have all this going on in the background, this horrific abuse and trauma
Mm,
happening. It's seeped into your family. It's literally everywhere around you, and you don't even have,
mm.
one soul that you can tell. How did that impact you, and how did you cope with it, doing normal things like going to school or being part of your
Yeah,
family?
I wasn't, Emma. I was at school very little, because what he'd do is he'd ring my parents and say, "Oh, Andy, can he stay just a few more days?" And I'd be there for a week on end or 2 weeks, and that's the magnitude of how many times, you see, because you know the 6 week holidays, I'd live there for 6 weeks solid. I didn't go home, and I've spoke to friends now that know about everything that went to my school, and they said, "Do you know what we didn't realize? But you did subtly change, and I think I went quieter and more introvert. But I think what everybody does is what they can do is it's like I always revert to the mask, Jim Carrey in the mask and putting the different masks on. I was able to master that even at a young age, where I'd cover it. I'd, although all that horrible stuff was happening, I kind of got used to it. It was like that was normal. So as a child at that age, that was normal. And that just was a learned thing that that was how it was. And that's what I had to do. And all I wanted to do was be a footballer. So whatever he did to me, it was like, well, that's normal for me because I don't know any different now. And I think that's what else is something at a young age. If it happens that much, it becomes normal. And I've spoke to a lot of people that have recognised that with me when I've said, yeah, it felt like that was the norm. And it's your brain's a powerful thing, and it's, if it's repeated that many times, it as a child, even in adolescence, it can be, that's just normal, and you get on with it.
And at that age, being so young, you're being introduced to acts that mature adults do. This isn't something a 10-year-old has a conceptualization of. And when an adult is doing this to you and at the same time saying, I love you, and doing these things to groom you and making you feel good, and then at the same time confusing you by abusing you and hurting you, it's an extremely confusing time for the child. And they know that. They know that they can control you through fear, but you can't have full control over a child unless you have a trauma bond. The child has to have an attachment to the abuser in order for the abuse to continue. Because if you didn't feel some type of care from him, or that, oh my gosh, well, if I do this, he said I'm going to make it as a football player. That's my dream. Like, I have to do this. This is what he says. Like, I have to go to practice and I have to do this with him. This is my way to get there. The child that takes that on as, like you said, just being normal, but also the abuser uses it to form an attachment bond, because they're making you promises at the same time that they're making threats, knowing that the fear, the trauma, and also the promises are going to keep you silent. Like it's a deliberate tactic and scheme that they use, and they know that these things can keep a child silent.
Yeah, and that's so true, Emma. And I just, this is a really important podcast because I've not really delved into the deep side of what happens and how it happens, and the lengths that these will go to do, their sick acts. But the sick acts also continue with. It doesn't have to be the sexual element. And I've always said this, whether it's physical, mental, sexual, you name it, abuse is abuse, and it can really trigger and cause, it's phenomenal the amount of people in this humanity, in this generation that I'm in, and also the younger ones and older ones that have been affected by abuse. And it's like with me, I remember him taking me to these block of flats, and this is how sick-minded he was and how he get off on it, that he knew he was going to, I think it was the mum and dad of Ronald Bennell, and he parked up outside these flats and he said, you'll love this, Andy. We're going to go up there and go and see someone that's special to me. And we went in, and it was an older couple. And I remembered seeing, how you remember things, and it was a picture in there, and it was Ronald Bennell. And I only knew that when I was older and I saw a photograph of him in just recent years, and I knew it was him. And that's the sickness of him, to take me, knowing full well, and knowing that he was in a relationship with Lynda, my sister, knowing that her name was Lynda and she'd been murdered by his relation. That's how sick they are, and the levels that they will get off. So it doesn't, a psychopath like that, and there's many out there, it doesn't have to be the sexual, Emma. It can also be the mental, the physical, in relationships, in parents, in boarding schools, in church, in you name it. They destroy people. destroy a child. And that's what, and it's destroying a child, but it's also the vulnerability of those that are vulnerable. They take advantage of vulnerability. And that's something else in humanity that goes on in institutes, organizations, everything in life, relationships, marriages, you name it. That's another big element to why this world is or has been such a dark commodity. But I do believe that it's going to shift. I see it shifting. And I'm yo-yoing, I'm coming back to now. But what I'm talking about is there as the youngsters back then in the culture, if it was different, doesn't matter if the culture has changed, just they can change because they're like chameleons, and whatever they can use because of what we've got now in AI, you name it, they're still out there, and we've got to out them, and we've got to get them, and we've got to, stop this and bring some balance to it.
Amen. 100%. And it's because people like you that are speaking out that are creating this snowball effect throughout the world. We'll get into it in a little bit, but I mean, your testimony alone brought forth hundreds of other boys who came forward and had the courage to testify because you did, and that's all it takes. Sometimes we forget in our own trauma, we're made to feel, so insignificant if we're abused and worthless. And then the shame and the guilt that it puts on you, it's, it's debilitating. It's crippling what trauma does. And like you said, yours was so young that you experienced it. 10 years old, a child who shouldn't be introduced to sexual acts or understanding these mature adult concepts is, being groomed and abused by a mature adult, telling them one day, I'm going to kill you. The next day, I love you, grooming their family. Like it's really disgusting and sick, but it's because people like you that can overcome that and find that crucial point where you take that trauma and say, all right, it's eating me alive. What can I do with it? I need to turn it into something. I need to transmute it. I can't just get rid of it. It doesn't just go away today because I want it to. But what can I do with this to inspire other people? And, a lot of men, when we did that Inside the Boys, a podcast episode with Dr. Naomi and the rest of your team, one of the things that came up was male shame and feeling emasculated talking about being abused. Yes. And I'm thinking, as I'm hearing these amazing men talk, I'm thinking, what is more masculine than a man stepping up wanting to protect other innocents? Like there's nothing more masculine than speaking up against that and having the ability to relate it to your own story. I mean, that's so life-changing to be able to learn from somebody like you and to be able to possibly prevent other boys from being harmed, and it's so backwards that shame can make you feel emasculated, where in reality, it's actually very masculine to take that in an empowering way and say, I'm going to use what I went through to help protect other people.
Yeah, definitely. And, that was the whole purpose of what I did. And it's funny when you said at the start about it's the synergy of it. And, Daniel Taylor, when I did what I did, was in the Guardians, and that's how we should be, and being guardians to those that are, it's happening right now, Emma, suffering right now. And the shame element of it is so fundamental as well. Shame is something that you sit with for a very long time, and you're shameful by not speaking out at the time. The shame about your family members and the ripple effect. The shame also that you've got so many relationships wrong, because I did. I've been married 4 times. By the time I was 18, so he'd stopped raping me. Stopped sexually. His last one was a sexual assault. And I was nearly 17. By the time I was 18, I'd met a woman in a nightclub, and I didn't know what the hell was going on. And within 2 months, she was pregnant. And I was like, I didn't even know what I was. I didn't even understand. And, that failed, and so many relationships that failed. And, you know, accountability for myself is that there's no excuse for sometimes the things that happened with me. And, you know, but I just didn't know relationships. I didn't know what they were. I've always been a kind-hearted, giving man. And I've always give my money, my football career. I gave it to my ex-wife because we ended up with 4 children. I walked away with bin bags because I wanted my children to have the best life possible. But it was untenable because there was a lot going on there that I couldn't cope with. You know, a lot of, and there is a lot to be said about a vulnerability, and those that have suffered from any kind of abuse as children, they tend to also migrate to narcissistic tendencies with a partner. And I'm not saying that, you know, they go for you, but I do think there's a bit of a red light on somebody's head that has suffered abuse, and somebody with power, and that they are, you know, they are type of narcissistic in some ways, because I know many people that have been abused that ended up in abusive relationships, and that's a pattern of your vulnerability as well, because all I ever wanted to is somebody to love me, make me feel safe, that I was protected. But unfortunately, I chose people that were the opposite to that. And I do feel that that is a trait as well. And I know with men and women that I've spoke to, and hundreds of them, that, you know, have all tended to have that kind of pattern in the life as well. And, you know, I did what I did. And, you know, in my 20s and 30s, lost, you know, the amount of times, Emma, I've tried to commit, no, not just tried, I committed suicide. So there was something always up there that wouldn't let me go. And they wouldn't let me, yeah, end this world and leave it, because I obviously had work to do. And 2016, and I'm moving on in life, but there was so much in my relationships and with him. And you say about 97, and I lost my football career because the police were hounding me, Emma, and they knew I was the key to him. He'd been in prison in America, and he was coming home, and my sister was going to stay with him. And they just hounded me, and they caught me on the right time for them, but the worst time for me, because my sister was at my mum's and dad's, and she had Corey and Jodie, the 2 children. And bless them, he was only 8, and he had a thirst for him, and I had a decision to make, and that was, do I tell the police that it happened to me? Because if I do, then he'll get locked up, and he can't get to him. And he didn't really care about the girl; he just wanted the boy.
And that
And
was his own.
yes, oh
Oh
yes,
my gosh. So him and your
oh
sister had
yes,
4 children, and he was preying on the boy.
he would do. He When he got out of the prison, and he was coming up to the age that he liked. You see, 10. So I ended up saying what I said, and 18 months later, I ended up with panic attacks and panic disorder, because it takes a bit for the trauma to kick in. And I lost my football career after that, you know. But I saved him. He was only a young boy, and they're both doing really well now. Traumatized, but, you know, but they're doing well, and uh, you know, I saved him from that misery. But I paid a price because I lost my football career then, which is, it is what it is. You know, I did that then, and I've maintained my, you know, my dignity, my integrity, and me breaking what I did was for others, wasn't for me. And I could have gone back, Emma, I could have given more evidence because I didn't even give remotely what he did to me. But when it went so big, I wanted others to get justice and not me. And that's why I didn't go again at him, because I didn't want it to be all about me, even though I was the whistleblower. I wanted others to get justice. And yeah, there was over 350 football clubs implicated, um, and people from all over the world. Yeah,
And I don't
I
want to skip over this part either. You had an extremely successful professional football career, and you even were successful before you went pro. You did amazing even as a child, and I want
yeah,
to spend just a moment highlighting, if you want to talk a little bit about that. I think it's
yeah,
incredible what you were able to accomplish with all of this happening behind the scenes, and knowing that you were little bit more introverted. You had sort of
mm,
gone inside yourself. You were suffering emotionally, mentally, physically, sexually, spiritually, and you still were able to perform so high on the field and still accomplish the dreams that you set out to do.
yeah. I did. I don't know. I think I've got this inner strength that I just wouldn't let it or give in. And yeah, I mean, I played for, my first professional game. I played at Crewe, and albeit that, yeah, I mean, I only played 200 games, and a lot of that was due to my mental side of things, where, sometimes it was hard, Emma. It really was, where I'd be battling because if I heard a football manager shouting, I'd get traumatized because I'd think of him and other managers that, were there and screaming and shouting, which they have to do. But it was hard because I'd go into child mode. There's also, the element of going in showers as well, and with the team. And I'd always wrap myself with a towel, and I didn't know what I was doing, to be honest with you. Yeah, that one's against Man City. I remember that. So yeah, I played at Wembley twice. I played at Old Trafford in the Cup, and I played at the grounds that I wanted to. I played at Main Road. I played at Man United's ground, and my dad was a United fan, so he was able to see me play there at Old Trafford. And they never missed a game, my mum and dad. They followed me all the way. So I wanted to do it for them as well, and that element there, it's a real shocking picture, that, because he's in the background, and just to the left there's a boy in the blue, and he was 4 years older than me, and you see me smiling there. Well, he just started. I was probably a year in, and the boy in the blue to the left, he was exhausted because he'd had 3 years of it, and he'd stopped staying. So when you look at that image, you can really see it in his eyes, in his soul, in his spiritual aura, that he was broken. And unfortunately for me, I ended up with 6 years of it, but that was 3 years of abuse by that man in the background that's kneeling down there. So very powerful image, that, and it does tell a story.
And you mentioned too, his preferences seem to have been 10 to 14. And then as his
Yeah,
players would get older, he'd rotate them. However, once you got past the age of 14, he actually made an exception to his own rule and
yeah,
ended up following you on your career path as you got older too.
yes. And what was interesting about this as well is his obsession with me, and obviously he was in a relationship with Lynda, is that he then, I thought that I'd break free from him. He then became my YTS manager at the age of 16 to 18. So I couldn't get away from him. And that was the first time he'd ever coached an older team, but he wanted to keep hold of me. And that's sick, because he just wanted to exhaust everything he could out of me. and I said, like, I was nearly 17 when he stopped. So, and that was only because probably he thought that Lynda had seen him. So he had to work on that and back off me. Yeah, it's horrific, isn't it?
Now, of course, there were so many obstacles, including the threats that he made, the grooming from
Mm.
such a young age. Before you can even understand what these concepts are, you're being exposed to very, very mature and horrific things that no child should ever have to go through. Being told really disgusting and vile threats and very frightening threats. So, of course, there's that element of silence that's going to follow you. Did you ever throughout your life have either an intervention where somebody tended to notice or ask you if you were okay ever? Or was there ever somebody that you felt safe enough to try to tell, even though obviously nothing was done?
No. And I think you go through that. I think you go through a process of wanting somebody to find out, yet you're in too much fear to say anything. And you don't feel safe, so you can't reach out to anyone, but you're desperately inside screaming out to go, please see this, can somebody see it? And that didn't happen because there was all sorts of things going on at Crewe that it was right through the central spine of that football club. And there was another coach that sexually assaulted me as well, and that was just once. And I say that just once, and people go, "No, Andy, but it was only once." And he brought him in, so it was rife there. And how you see what I've got a lot of, not shame, but I've got a bit of guilt because when I'd broke the truth. I did give a statement about that assault, and there was one other boy who was a man now who tried to prosecute, and he didn't get justice. But if I knew of others that it happened to in that club, and unfortunately he got away with it, which I felt awful, but I just couldn't cope with that on top of being globally contacted from, you name it, from blooming Brazil to Argentina to Australia to Europe, all these magazines and doing all that. I just couldn't, I didn't have enough strength to go through that process again. But there's no doubt well, it did happen. And it's a shame, but it's like I always say, when people don't get justice, and they know. And even no matter what, nobody can take that away. That you know what happened, you know the truth, and they know the truth. Whether they get away with it or not, they know what they've done.
Which is why they work so hard to keep it quiet, because even
Yes.
though they might not feel emotionally connected to it because they're psychopathic, there's not this sense of guilt and shame that they're outwardly showing. If they didn't feel that deep down on some level, they wouldn't care if they got caught. These are people who know that it's wrong consciously. They do everything they can to shield it from people finding out. But that is their sort of that's kind of the dagger that you throw through their heart and get them to feel something, is when you do speak out, because you're breaking that spell that they put on you. You're breaking what nobody else did. A lot of them do this so often, and their victims just take it to the grave, and they're never discovered. And that is their, that's their enemy, is your voice. That's the greatest weapon that you can ever use against them. And, I just think it's incredible.
And also, I know, and we'll do a part 2, and we'll go into the realms of what I did and how I brought everything to the forefront. But there's one thing I know in that dirty, dark world, that dark web of darkness, there is like a pyramid with that as well, and that rolls downwards. And there's those in very powerful positions that have known this for a very, very, very long time. and been hiding it. And that pyramid, as you know, with a triangle, it has three sides. And I'm telling you now, at that pinnacle top, when one of those sides break, it cascades. The triangle falls apart, and there's something gonna happen, and they can't hide forever. The institutes, those in power, those that feel like they're getting or got away with it, there has to be a moment when one of those sides will fall. And I do believe that will happen. It's just a matter of time. So
Absolutely, yes. It's already happened. Time just hasn't caught up yet. That's what I always say. And I wanted to show this photo too because I think it's also a very revealing photo that you had sent.
yes,
Again, with just the confusion and the vileness that you were surrounded with, and everybody was just going along with.
oh yeah, absolutely, and that that's a very powerful photograph of the lengths and the the audacity and power that he felt he had there, because that's my sister being married to him, and there's a couple of boys there that are young, and they were part of, and then I'm at the back with another few older that were about 16, 17. So that's a powerful photograph of when somebody can stand in the middle there and get married, knowing that it's all around him, even children that he was abusing at that time, and knowing that he can stand next to my mother, and my dad's not on that, but stand next to my mother, knowing what he'd done to my sister and me. It just is shocking to see that's the lengths they'll go to.
And
And so, yeah, I'm fooling everyone around there, yet knew damn well that there was a couple of kids there and others, including me, what he'd done to or was doing to. It's a Jimmy Savile thing. He was, he was as evil as that.
How many other adults do you know of in these different clubs, for your testimony specifically and your experiences, that knew about this and shrugged it off?
Wow. Well, since doing what I did, I know the problem is getting the hard evidence to prove that. But it's like the post office scandal. Eventually, it has to be revealed. But I can't say. I know of several at that football club at Crewe. I know several that knew at Man City. I know of several that were part of the institutes at that time that ignored it. So, when they start to multiply, and it's only when you really delve and it's like anything, if you turn all those stones over, eventually it starts to multiply. It's like me, for instance, what I did, there was just me on my own. Within a week, I had 5 on the sofa. Within 2 weeks, I had hundreds coming out, from nowhere. And when I was on my own on that sofa, it was worth doing it. Even I'll go into it another time with you about what happened, but there was a 13-year-old boy in his bedroom, and he'd written his suicide note, and he was going to commit suicide. And he saw me on Victoria Derbyshire show, and he rang in, and he said I saved his life, and I'm still in contact with him. And he was going to kill himself. And he saw me on there, and he said that it stopped him. So if nothing else, it was worth it for that, because he's doing well now. He's still going through therapy, etc., but he's doing great, and he's still alive. So certainly had an impact on that day.
Isn't that amazing? What was the response like from your family who were so in the dark about this, and other people in your life and the public when all this started blowing up and becoming more known?
Yeah, it was difficult at first for my family because I didn't really want to cause them any, you know, they've been through a lot, so I kept it quite low key at first, and then I didn't expect it to blow as big as it did, so I had to like confess and go, okay, this has gone huge. I need to share this, and it was a bit difficult for my sister at first, but she she now knows why I did it, and and what's happened. But yeah, my friends and people that were close to me, I didn't really have a lot of friends back then. I kept myself to myself, and a lot of that's to do with trust. And you know, I when they say about trust, I've put my trust in the people that I should never have trusted, but the ones I should have put my trust in, I, I didn't. If that does that make sense? It's like I've put my trust in people that I thought were going to help or be kind people or, have good hearts. And that's what else is really hard to get your head around. Why I put so much trust in people that have wronged me when there is beautiful people out there that I've now got around me. It's took a long time, but 9 years on, I'm now in a position where I've got beautiful people around me and I feel safe. But back then and throughout my life, I've not. And it's like as though I'd just been throughout my life, I've just been riddled with torment and narcissism and really bad people.
I think
But
too, when you're a good person who's doing the right thing, you think that if you share what you went through with other people, say journalists or lawyers, people that are in positions
yes,
to help, school authorities, sports authorities, people that were overseeing and had the oversight of the organizations and clubs that you belong to, you think that the person that you're talking to, their reaction will be what yours is, which is just devastation, and that they'll empathize with you and be like, all right, what do we got to do to stop this? Let's go. If it's a journalist, oh my gosh, we have to get this out to the public. There's an abuser and there's lots of kids involved. But a lot of times it's the opposite, especially with the clubs and the institutions, because they care more about the reputation of, oh my gosh, well, if they were doing this at my club and that gets out, we're ruined. How are we going to make money? And how are we going to continue making money off these kids? We gotta shut this one kid up, not our organization. We don't want our organization to go down because one kid or one adult is speaking out, So instead of protecting the children, they try to silence the children just like the abusers did and allow the perpetration to continue and look away because it's better for their reputation. They keep making money if it just all blows under the water.
You got it, Emma. And that was the last 9 years. Oh, yeah.
Journalists and everybody, people are really afraid to, be the cause of the downfall of something. Nobody wants to ruffle the feathers. They just want things to be sort of glorious and dandy and just collect a paycheck and go home. It's not about doing the right thing with a lot of organizations, institutions, and people in power that are, we think can help. We're just conditioned to think that.
Yeah. And that's something that, I've had full solid 9 years of education of everything, every media outlet, every journalist, everything. And those at the very top as well.
So, Andy, one of the things that I love about what you've done is you've eternalized your story into a memoir. And I wanted to give you some time to promote that before we wrap up and before we continue in our next episode on a part 2 to talk about those 9 years and beyond. But I wanted you to be able to share about your memoir, what inspired you to do it, and just to give people a little teaser of it and where they can get it.
Yeah, I mean, with the book, again, I'll talk about it in part 2 about the last 9 years and the decisions and what I did. But I did want to write it. That was the original reason why I did the article, because I was told by my therapist it was like a blockbuster and Netflix series, my life, which, you know, I wanted to write something to just help others, just so they could associate with what I'd gone through, to see how it all sort of like entailed, and just a book where, you see, a lot of it was taken out, which was no fault of my own. But it was, you know, it's a book, it's deep, but I wanted to actually, for other people to really associate with the life and pattern of life and what can happen. And you know, it was written years ago. I mean, I was shortlisted for the William Hill Book of the Year, but I didn't win, and that doesn't surprise me, because all the other people, the person that actually won it, Emma, came up to me and said, "I'm so embarrassed, Andy. I'm so embarrassed that I won the Book of the Year." He said, "Because your book is rewarding and it's for others, and it should be you that should have won this." And that, you know, it said it all. And I'm grateful. I'm grateful for the book. I'm grateful for it to have gone out. You can't change a past, can you? But what is there is just a testimony of some of the things that happened. And it's just something for, I hope people could just grab it and just go, that's me. I'm not alone. I'm not on my own. Oh, I had this feeling. So yeah, so it's out there. It's on Amazon. I've never really plugged it, Emma. So this is a new one for me, trying to get people to read my book. It's just, you know, it's out there, and you know, the film that I made, you know, Floodlights, it's disappeared now off the face of the earth. But one day I'll do something else. I'll write another book.
Absolutely. And I like to share this stuff because they can erase us online, but a book is a way that we can eternalize things, even if it's not, you know, 100% something that ended up being your full testimony, or written in a way, or edited, you know, in a way that's maybe not fully authentic. It's still a way to eternalize your story that people can get and collect and give as a gift. And I'm just really grateful for all the ways that you've devoted yourself to getting your story out. And despite all the opposition, which we'll talk about that more next time with and a lot of the different projects that went wrong with trying to whistleblow this story and get it out there mainstream. But I just want to commend you for all your hard work, for never giving up, for just continuing to keep going, for your courage to speak out to begin with, knowing the statistics on men speaking out is so low in comparison to women. You know, you really are a hero. You're doing just such great work. You're giving inspiration. And that one person that told you that you saved their life, I know he's not the only one. You know, there's many out there who want to live another day because they found your testimony. And I mean, it just sends chills down my spine, just what honorable work this is. We can't thank you enough, Andy.
Oh, no, thank you so much, Emma. And I would love to I'd be honored to do a part 2 and, you know, really explain the lengths and what happened to me. But I'm here for a reason, and it's just all starting again. And what will be, and there's nothing that's going to stop me on my tracks, because I'm on that train again.
And that little boy, once again, smiles for you. And so with that note, Andy, thank you again for coming on. I'm just really grateful and can't wait to do a part 2. For everybody listening, I'll have all Andy's contact information in the show notes, including his book link, and then where to connect with him online. Please check out the Inside the Boys Club episode that we did. That also illustrates another project that we'll talk a little bit more about next time, but we did a full episode on it, which was awesome. And all my contact information will also be in the show notes, you guys. So thank you guys all for listening. God bless you all, and we will see you next time.
Goodbye.